My name is Rosa, and I'm 56 years old. If you're watching this story, maybe you understand what it feels like when the person you love most in the world looks at you like you're nothing. Maybe you know what it's like to give everything, your time, your money, your dreams, your very soul, only to be treated like a burden. I never thought I'd be telling this story. For months, I convinced myself it was just a phase. That my son Julian would remember who raised him, who sacrificed everything to make sure he had opportunities I never had. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember because the cherry blossoms were blooming outside my kitchen window. The same window where I used to hold Julian as a baby, pointing at the flowers and teaching him colors. Pink, I would say, and he would giggle and reach his tiny fingers toward the glass. I was making his favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary, the way my mother taught me, the way I'd made it every Sunday for 30 years. The house smelled like home, like love, like all the memories we'd built together in these walls. I had set the table for two, with the good plates I usually saved for holidays, because I wanted this dinner to be special. You see, I had something important to tell him. After 26 years of being alone, of raising him by myself after his father died, I had finally decided to start dating again. There was a kind man named David from my church, a widower who understood loss, who made me laugh in a way I hadn't in decades. I was nervous but excited to share this news with Julian, hoping he would be happy that his mother might find companionship again. When Julian walked through the front door, he didn't hug me like he used to. He barely looked at me. At 30 years old, my son had become a stranger. Tall, handsome, successful in his finance job, but cold in ways that broke my heart every time I saw him. "Mom, this better be important," he said, not even taking off his expensive coat. "I have dinner plans with Sarah." Sarah was his girlfriend of 3 months, a woman I'd met exactly once, who looked at me like I was an embarrassing relative at a wedding. "I made your favorite," I said softly, gesturing toward the kitchen. "And I wanted to talk to you about something important." He sighed. Actually sighed. Like spending time with his mother was the greatest inconvenience imaginable. "Fine, but make it quick. If you subscribe to our channel, you're helping us reach 1,000 subscribers, and that means the world to us. Please comment what city you're watching from. I love knowing that our stories reach people everywhere." We sat at the dining room table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd celebrated his graduation, where I'd held him when he cried after his father's funeral. But now, looking across that same table, I felt like I was dining with a stranger who merely happened to share my DNA. "Julian," I began carefully, my hands trembling slightly as I served him the chicken I'd spent hours preparing. "I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about starting to date again." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Julian stopped chewing, put down his fork, and stared at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not anger, not surprise, but disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. "Are you serious?" he said finally, his voice flat and cruel. "You're 56 years old, Mom? You think anyone actually wants to date you?" The words hit me like a slap across the face. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, felt my heart start racing the way it did when I was having anxiety attacks after his father died. But this was worse than grief. This was humiliation delivered by the person I loved most in the world. "Julian, please." "No, Mom. This is embarrassing. What are you going to do? Start hanging around bars? Online dating? Do you have any idea how pathetic that looks? You're a grandmother's age. Act like it." I wasn't even a grandmother. He'd made sure of that, always putting off serious relationships, always finding excuses when I gently asked about his future plans. But in that moment, his words made me feel ancient, used up, worthless. "I just thought you might be happy that I found someone kind." "Kind?" Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, you have nothing to offer anyone. You work at a grocery store. You live in this old house. You drive a car that's 15 years old. What could you possibly give to a relationship except baggage and bills?" Each word was a knife finding its mark with surgical precision. This was my son. The baby I'd nursed through fever. The child I'd tutored through algebra. the teenager I'd driven to baseball practice even when I was working double shifts and could barely afford gas. This was the young man I'd sent to college by selling my engagement ring, my grandmother's jewelry, everything of value I owned. "I raised you," I whispered, and immediately hated how small my voice sounded. "I worked 2 jobs to put you through school. I gave up dating for 26 years because I wanted to focus on being your mother. And look how that turned out," he said, gesturing around our modest home with contempt. "You gave up dating and accomplished what exactly? You're still poor. You're still working retail. You still live in the same house Dad left you. All that sacrifice. And for what?" I stared at him across the table. This man I'd shaped with my own hands, my own love, my own sleepless nights and worried prayers. When had he become so cold? When had my love become something to be ashamed of rather than treasured? "I sacrificed because I loved you," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "Everything I did because you were my world." Julian stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped against the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself last summer. "Well, maybe that was your mistake, Mom. Maybe you should have had a life instead of making me your entire reason for existing. It's not healthy, and frankly, it's not fair to dump that responsibility on me now." He walked toward the door, leaving his half-eaten dinner on the table, leaving me sitting alone with my announcement about David hanging unspoken in the air between us. I wanted to call after him, to ask him to stay, to finish our conversation, to remember the man I'd raised him to be. But something in his posture, in the set of his shoulders, told me that asking would only give him another opportunity to hurt me. "Julian, wait." He turned back, and for just a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the boy who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world, but it disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. "Mom, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice taking on the patient tone people use when explaining obvious things to children. "I'm building a life now. A real life, with real opportunities. I can't have you clinging to me like I'm still 10 years old. You need to figure out how to be happy on your own." And with that, he left, taking with him the last of my illusions about the gratitude I thought I'd earned through decades of sacrifice. I sat alone at that table for 3 hours, staring at the meal I'd prepared with such hope, watching it grow cold while tears fell onto the good china I'd used to make our dinner special. Outside, the cherry blossoms continued blooming, indifferent to the fact that my world had just cracked open in ways I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. That dinner was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I kept telling myself that Julian was going through a difficult phase, that work stress was making him irritable, that eventually my loving son would return. I made excuses for him the way mothers do when they can't bear to admit that the child they raised has become someone they don't recognize. I started small, trying to rebuild the bridge between us. I'd text him, call him, try to show interest in his life, but every interaction felt forced, like he was checking an obligation off a to-do list rather than talking to his mother. "Julian, I was just thinking about you," I'd say when he finally returned my calls. "Mom, I'm busy. What do you need? What do you need?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "I missed you too." Just the assumption that I was calling because I wanted something from him. I started noticing things I'd been blind to before. At family gatherings, Julian would position himself across the room from me. If relatives asked about his work, he'd become animated and charming. But if anyone mentioned something I'd done, a promotion at work, a pie I'd baked for church, his face would go blank, and he'd quickly change the subject. My sister Maria noticed it before I was ready to admit it. During her daughter's graduation party, she pulled me aside. "Rosa, what's going on with Julian?" she asked quietly. He introduced Sarah to everyone, told them all about her. But when people asked about you, he said you work in retail and changed the subject. "People wouldn't even realize you're his mother." The observation hit me like a physical blow. My own son was ashamed of me. "Maybe he just doesn't like talking about family," I said weakly. Maria touched my arm. "Rosa, you worked 2 jobs to put him through college. You sold your wedding ring for his textbooks. Any son worth having would be proud to call you his mother." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Julian over the past 6 months. How had I missed the signs? When had his distance turned into active rejection? When had my love become something he found burdensome rather than precious? The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on Mother's Day. I had spent the morning at church, listening to Pastor Williams give a sermon about honoring our parents, about gratitude and family bonds. Around me, families sat together in pews, adult children with their arms around aging mothers and fathers, grandchildren drawing pictures for grandparents. I sat alone, as I had for years. But this time, the solitude felt different. Heavier, more permanent. I'd bought Julian a card, not for him to give me, but for me to give him, thanking him for being my son. It was something I'd done every Mother's Day since he'd become an adult. A small tradition that reminded both of us that being his mother was the greatest gift I'd ever received. The card was simple, with a picture of cherry blossoms on the front, and inside I'd written, "Thank you for making me a mother. It's been the greatest privilege of my life. I love you always." I drove to his apartment complex, a modern building downtown with a doorman and marble floors in the lobby. The kind of place I could never afford, but had helped him secure by co-signing his lease when he was just starting his career. I'd planned to invite him to dinner, maybe cook his favorite dessert, spend the day together like we used to. But when I walked into the lobby, I saw him immediately. He was standing by the elevators with Sarah and another couple I didn't recognize, all of them dressed elegantly as if they were heading somewhere special. Julian was laughing at something the man had said, his face animated in a way I hadn't seen in months. I approached them with my card in hand, my heart beating fast with nervous excitement. Maybe seeing me would remind him of all our good times together. Maybe this would be the moment we reconnected. "Julian!" I called out, waving slightly. He turned, and the change in his expression was instantaneous. The laughter died on his face, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. He glanced quickly at his friends, then back at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected complication. "Mom," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" "It's Mother's Day," I said, suddenly feeling foolish for having to explain. "I brought you something and I thought maybe we could spend some time together." The silence that followed was excruciating. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, looking between Julian and me like she was watching a tennis match. The other couple exchanged glances that clearly said they felt awkward witnessing this family moment. "We're actually heading out," Julian said, his voice taking on that polite but distant tone he might use with a persistent saleswoman. "We have brunch reservations." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Maybe later then? I could make dinner." "Mom, I'm busy today. Maybe some other time." Some other time. On Mother's Day. As if spending time with his mother was something that could be rescheduled like a dentist appointment or an oil change. Sarah touched Julian's arm, a gesture that was clearly meant to be supportive, but felt like salt in an open wound. Here was this woman he'd known for 4 months, someone who got to share his Sunday brunch while his mother stood in a lobby being politely dismissed. "Well," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face, "I'll just give you this and let you go." I held out the card, and Julian took it with the same enthusiasm someone might show for receiving a piece of junk mail. He didn't open it, didn't read the message I'd spent an hour crafting. He just tucked it into his jacket pocket like it was something to be dealt with later, when more important people weren't watching. "Thanks, Mom," he said, already turning back toward his friends. "I'll call you." But he didn't call. Not that day, not that week, not the week after. I waited by the phone like a lovesick teenager, checking my messages obsessively, wondering if somehow I'd missed his call. I even called the phone company to make sure my service was working properly. 2 weeks later, I ran into Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store. She was a sweet elderly woman who had always asked about Julian. "How's that handsome son of yours?" she asked as we stood in the produce section. "He's doing well," I said automatically. "I saw him at that fancy restaurant downtown last weekend," she continued. "He was with a lovely young woman and her parents." "Family celebration?" My hands went still. Julian had taken Sarah and her parents to dinner, a formal, expensive dinner, and I hadn't known about it. While I waited for him to return my Mother's Day call, he was charming another family. "Yes," I managed to say, though my throat felt tight. "A celebration." That night, I sat in my living room holding the Mother's Day card I'd given him, the one he'd never opened. I'd found it 3 days later in my mailbox. He'd actually mailed it back to me without opening it first. The envelope bore his address and a stamp, as if returning his mother's love was a business transaction. I opened the card and read my own words. "Thank you for making me a mother. It's been the greatest privilege of my life. I love you always." But sitting alone in that house, surrounded by photos of the boy he used to be, I began to wonder if that privilege was over, if the son I'd raised was gone, replaced by this stranger who viewed my love as an embarrassment. For the first time since his father died, I cried myself to sleep, not from grief over what I'd lost, but from the terrible realization that I might never have had it at all. The summer months brought a desperate hope that I'm ashamed to admit I clung to. I convinced myself that if I could just prove how much I loved Julian, maybe we could find our way back to each other. When I heard Julian had gotten a promotion, I decided to surprise him with a celebration dinner. I spent my weekend preparing his childhood favorites: homemade pasta, garlic bread, chocolate cake that took me 6 hours to decorate. I even bought wine, though it meant eating ramen for the rest of the week. I called him Monday evening, my voice bright with excitement. "Julian, I heard about your promotion. I'm so proud of you. I'd love to cook you a celebration dinner this weekend." There was a long pause, voices in the background. "Mom, that's really not necessary. We're having a party at Sarah's place Saturday. Her parents are flying in from Chicago to meet everyone. Everyone. Everyone except me." "Oh," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Well, maybe Sunday then? Just the two of us? I already bought all the ingredients." "Mom, I'm going to be busy this weekend. Maybe some other time. Maybe some other time." Those 4 words had become his standard response to every invitation, every suggestion, every attempt I made to be part of his life. They hung in the air like a door being quietly but firmly closed in my face. "I could bring the dinner to you," I offered, hating how desperate I sounded but unable to stop myself. "Or we could go somewhere you like." My treat. "Mom, please. I have to go. I'm at work." The line went dead, and I stood in my kitchen surrounded by grocery bags full of ingredients for a celebration that would never happen, feeling more foolish than I had since I was a teenager being rejected by boys who were out of my league. But I didn't give up. I signed up to volunteer at a literacy program downtown, thinking maybe if Julian saw me doing something meaningful, he might respect me again. When I mentioned it during one of our rare phone calls, his response was politely disinterested. "That's nice, Mom. That's nice." Like I'd told him about the weather. "The coordinator says I have a real gift for teaching." I pressed on, desperate for some sign of pride. "She asked if I'd consider additional shifts." "Good for you," he said. But I could hear him typing, multitasking through our conversation. The breaking point came in August, at Sarah's birthday party. Julian had mentioned it in passing. Not an invitation, just a casual reference to plans he was making that didn't include me. But I'd been thinking about it for weeks, wondering if this might be my chance to connect with the woman who had somehow earned the attention and affection that my own son no longer seemed capable of showing me. I bought Sarah a beautiful scarf, something I'd seen in a boutique window and saved for over a month to afford. It was silk, with delicate floral patterns, the kind of elegant accessory that successful young women wore to office jobs and dinner parties. I wrapped it carefully, wrote a thoughtful card about how happy I was that Julian had found someone special, and drove to Sarah's apartment building. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Through the large windows of her second-floor apartment, I could see well-dressed people laughing and talking, wine glasses catching the light, the kind of sophisticated gathering I'd imagined my son would eventually invite me to as his guest rather than his embarrassment. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart beating fast with nervous anticipation. Maybe this gesture would show Julian that I could fit into his world, that I wasn't the social liability he seemed to think I was. Maybe Sarah would appreciate the effort I'd made, and that appreciation would reflect well on me in Julian's eyes. When Julian opened the door, his face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Surprise, alarm, calculation, and finally resignation. Behind him, I could see Sarah approaching, beautiful in a way that made me acutely aware of my discount store dress and careful but amateur makeup. "Mom," Julian said, not moving aside to let me in. "What are you doing here?" "I brought Sarah a birthday gift," I said, holding up the carefully wrapped box. I wanted to wish her a happy birthday in person. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. I could sense other party guests becoming aware of the interaction, conversations quieting as people tried to figure out what was happening at the door. "That's very thoughtful," Sarah said finally, but her voice carried the same polite distance Julian had mastered, the tone people use with persistent salespeople or unwanted solicitors. Julian still hadn't invited me inside. I stood in the hallway, holding my gift, while party sounds continued behind him. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. It was like being a child pressed against a toy store window, looking at a world I wasn't allowed to enter. "Well," I said, extending the gift toward Sarah, "I don't want to interrupt your party. I just wanted you to have this." Sarah took the box with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Rosa. This is very kind." She didn't know my last name. This woman my son had been dating for months, who attended family celebrations and met her parents, didn't even know my last name. "You didn't need to come all the way over here," Julian said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't gratitude for my thoughtfulness, but irritation at my presumption. "I wanted to," I said simply. "I hope you have a wonderful evening, Sarah. Happy birthday." As I turned to leave, I heard Sarah say something quietly to Julian, and his response, though whispered, carried clearly in the hallway. "I'm sorry. She just shows up sometimes. She just shows up sometimes." Like I was a stray cat that wandered onto their porch, a minor nuisance to be managed rather than welcomed. The words followed me down the stairs and into my car, where I sat for 10 minutes trying to compose myself before driving home. 3 days later, I found the scarf I'd given Sarah at a local consignment shop, still in its original wrapping, with a $15 price tag attached. The card I'd written was nowhere to be found, probably thrown away without being read. That night, I called my sister Maria. "Rosa, honey, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "I think I've lost him," I said. The words barely a whisper. "I think I've lost my son." "What do you mean?" "He doesn't want me in his life anymore. I'm an embarrassment to him. I went to his girlfriend's birthday party to be nice, and he acted like I was some crazy woman who'd wandered in off the street." "Rosa, you raised that boy to be better than this. This isn't your fault." "Maybe it is," I said, voicing my deepest fear. "Maybe I loved him wrong." "There's no such thing as loving your child wrong," Maria said firmly. "You sacrificed everything for that boy. If he can't appreciate that, it says something about his character, not yours." But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere along the way, I'd failed, that the woman who'd raised Julian with such love had somehow become someone he was ashamed to acknowledge. September arrived with crisp air that usually filled me with hope, but that year it felt like a countdown to something I couldn't name. I'd stopped calling Julian unless absolutely necessary, stopped pretending his cold responses were evidence of a relationship worth fighting for. When my phone rang with his number on a Thursday evening, my first thought was that something terrible had happened. "Mom," he said, his tone businesslike. "I need to talk to you about something." My heart leaped with pathetic hope. Maybe this was the moment he'd realized how cruel he'd been. "Of course, honey. What is it?" "I'm getting married." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because I opposed him marrying Sarah, but because of how he was telling me, like informing a distant acquaintance of a business decision. "Oh," I managed. "That's wonderful, Julian. When?" "December 15th. We're having a small ceremony at Sarah's family's country club." Small ceremony. At her family's country club. The subtext was clear. This was her family's event, planned in their world, where I wouldn't fit and wasn't particularly welcome. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Can I help with anything?" I could. "Mom, that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." His voice took on that careful tone again, the one he used when he was about to deliver news he knew I wouldn't like. "The wedding is going to be very intimate. Immediate family only. Sarah's parents, her sister, my groomsmen. very small guest list. I waited for him to explain where I fit into this immediate family, to tell me what role his mother would play in the most important day of his life. But the silence stretched on until I realized with growing horror that I wasn't being asked to participate. I was being told why I was excluded. "Julian," I said carefully, "I'm your mother. I am your immediate family." "I know, Mom. But you have to understand, this is Sarah's day. Her family is paying for everything, and they have specific ideas about how they want things to be. It's going to be very formal, very refined. Sarah's worried that having too many people there will make it feel less special. Too many people. As if the woman who'd given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him, was just another warm body taking up space at his wedding. So I'm not invited to my own son's wedding?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Of course you're invited to the reception," he said quickly, as if this was a generous compromise. "There's going to be a bigger party afterward, more casual. You'll be more comfortable there anyway. More comfortable." He was telling me I'd be more comfortable excluded from the sacred moment when he promised his life to someone else, relegated to the casual after-party where my presence wouldn't embarrass him in front of Sarah's refined family. "Julian, please," I said, and I heard my voice break in a way that made me hate how desperate I sounded. "I dreamed of this day from the moment you were born. I've been saving money for years to help pay for your wedding. I bought a dress—" "Mom, we don't need your money," he interrupted, and there was something almost irritated in his voice, as if my offer was insulting rather than generous. "Sarah's family has everything covered. You don't need to worry about expenses. You don't need to worry." As if money was the only reason a mother would want to be involved in her son's wedding. As if my decades of dreams and hopes and careful planning could be dismissed with a wave of his hand. "This isn't about money, Julian. This is about being your mother. This is about being part of the most important day of your life. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm trying to include you in a way that works for everyone. The reception will be fun. You'll enjoy it more than sitting through a formal ceremony anyway." He was rewriting my feelings for me, deciding what I would and wouldn't enjoy, managing my expectations like I was a difficult client rather than the woman who'd loved him longer than anyone else in the world. That night, I sat in my living room holding the dress I'd bought for his wedding, a simple navy blue dress that had cost me 2 weeks' worth of grocery money, but made me feel elegant and mother of the groom appropriate. I'd imagined walking down the aisle, maybe on Julian's arm, taking my place in the front row as he married the woman he loved. Instead, I'd be watching from the parking lot, if I was lucky enough to catch a glimpse through the country club windows. I called my sister Maria, something I'd been doing more frequently as my isolation deepened. "He uninvited me from his own wedding," I said without preamble when she answered. "What do you mean uninvited? You're his mother. Apparently, I'm not immediate family enough for the ceremony. Sarah's family is paying, and they want it to be refined. I'm invited to the reception afterward, like some distant relative they have to include out of politeness." Maria was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she spoke, her voice was tight with anger. "Rosa, that boy has lost his mind. I don't care what Sarah's family wants. You're his mother. You should be in the front row, not banned from the ceremony like some embarrassing relative." "Maybe they're right," I said, and I realized I was crying without having noticed when the tears started. Maybe I don't belong in their world. Maybe Julian's embarrassed of me and he's right to be. "Stop that right now," Maria said firmly. "You raised a son who's successful, educated, decent. Or at least he was decent before he started acting like this. You did everything right, Rosa. If he's too blind to see that, it's his loss." But it didn't feel like his loss. It felt like mine. Completely, devastatingly mine. The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks later. The final confirmation of my exile. Heavy cardstock, elegant script, Sarah's family coat of arms embossed at the top, addressed to Rosa Morrison with no guest designation, no recognition that the groom's mother might need support. The invitation was for the reception only, starting at 7 p.m., 3 hours after the ceremony I wouldn't witness. Even my own son's wedding invitation reminded me of my secondary status. I RSVP'd that I would attend, though every fiber wanted to decline. But this was my son. 2 days before the wedding, Julian called again. "Mom, the reception is at Riverside Manor, about 20 minutes from the church. You should get there around 7:30. 7:30. Not 7 when it began, but 7:30. Ensuring I'd arrive after family photos and special moments. "Julian," I said, gathering my remaining courage, "I need you to know something. I may not understand why you've pushed me away, but I love you. I've always loved you. That will never change." The silence stretched forever. "I know, Mom," he said finally, his voice almost soft for a moment. "I'll see you at the reception." But I still had something they forgot. Something they couldn't take away. Something that had been growing quietly while my world fell apart. I just didn't know yet how much that something would change everything. The night after Julian's wedding announcement, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my small home office, surrounded by old boxes I'd avoided for years. Something was pulling me toward the past, toward memories I'd buried under my current heartbreak. In the back of the closet, I found the box labeled Miguel's papers in my own handwriting from 26 years ago. My husband's documents, his dreams, his plans for our future, that death had cut short when Julian was only 4. Miguel had been a dreamer, always talking about investments I'd dismissed as impractical fantasies. While I focused on immediate needs, groceries, rent, Julian's clothes, Miguel would spend evenings reading financial magazines and sketching business plans. I used to tease him about his get-rich-quick schemes. Inside the box were documents I'd never understood. Stock certificates, investment statements that meant nothing to me when I was a widow trying to keep my family afloat. There were notes in Miguel's script about renewable energy funds and emerging technology stocks. At the time, these seemed like expensive luxuries when I needed to buy diapers. But there was something else. A letter addressed to me in Miguel's handwriting, sealed and marked, "For Rosa. Open if I'm not here to explain." My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated 2 months before Miguel's heart attack. "My dearest Rosa," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably overwhelmed. I know you think my investments are foolish dreams, but I was building something for our family's future. I have been putting small amounts into accounts that will grow over time, just $20 or $30 each month from overtime pay. The account numbers are in this box. Promise me you won't touch this money unless you absolutely must. Let it grow. In 20 years, this could give you real security, enough to live with dignity. I love you and Julian more than my own life. Please don't let grief make you forget to dream. You are stronger than you know, mi amor. You are worth more than you believe." I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Miguel had been investing for our future, setting aside money I'd never known about, building something that had been growing quietly for 26 years while I struggled to make ends meet. The next morning, I took the documents to the bank. The young financial advisor who helped me looked increasingly surprised as we went through account after account. The renewable energy fund that Miguel had put $50 into each month had split multiple times and was now worth over $40,000. The technology stocks he'd bought when companies were still considered risky investments had multiplied beyond anything I could have imagined. "Mrs. Morrison," the advisor said, adjusting his glasses, "your total portfolio value is approximately $437,000. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" $437,000. Your husband was quite prescient in his investment choices. These companies have performed exceptionally well over the past quarter-century. $400,000. More money than I'd earned in my entire working life. More money than Julian made in 3 years at his finance job. Money that had been growing silently while I served customers at the grocery store, while I worried about rent and utilities, while my son treated me like a burden. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for an hour, holding the portfolio statement and trying to process what this meant. I wasn't the poor, desperate woman Julian saw when he looked at me. I wasn't the charity case Sarah's family needed to exclude from their refined celebration. I was a woman with options, with resources, with the power to make choices instead of simply enduring whatever life handed me. For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain or desperation. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was possibility. It was the quiet stirring of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Over the next weeks, I began to observe my life with new eyes. I started researching, the way Miguel used to do. I read about investments in charitable foundations, about women my age who had started new chapters after loss and disappointment. I learned about organizations that helped abandoned elderly people. Julian's wedding was still 2 weeks away, but something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't going as the desperate mother begging for crumbs of attention. I was going as Rosa Morrison, a woman who had raised a successful son through sacrifice, who had discovered she possessed resources and strength she'd never known she had. I bought a new dress, not from the discount store, but from a boutique where the saleswoman treated me with respect I'd forgotten I deserved. The dress was elegant, deep green, bringing out my eyes in a way that reminded me I was still worthy of admiration. I made phone calls to lawyers about setting up a charitable foundation. I researched properties in better neighborhoods. I looked into community centers that needed funding, organizations that served women like me who'd been discarded by ungrateful children. The woman Julian would see at his reception would still be his mother. She would still love him, but she would no longer be the woman who begged for his approval or apologized for existing. She would be someone entirely different. Someone he'd never bothered to know. Someone whose strength had nothing to do with his opinion of her. It wasn't revenge. It was decision. 2 days before the wedding, I called the law office I'd been working with to set up the Rosa Morrison Foundation for Abandoned Seniors. The paperwork was almost complete, the initial funding secured from Miguel's investments. My lawyer, a kind woman in her 50s who'd listened to my story without judgment, assured me that everything would be finalized within the week. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "in 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen someone transform their pain into something so constructive. Your foundation is going to change lives." That night, I looked at myself in the mirror wearing the green dress I'd bought for Julian's reception. The woman looking back at me was familiar but changed, like a photograph that had been taken out of shadow and into proper light. I was still Rosa Morrison, still Julian's mother, still the widow who'd struggled for so many years. But I was also something more now. Something Julian had never seen and didn't yet understand he'd lost the chance to know. I thought about Miguel's letter, about his belief that I was stronger than I knew, worth more than I believed. For 26 years, I'd carried his faith in me without understanding what it meant. Now, finally, I was beginning to see myself through his eyes instead of through Julian's disappointment. Tomorrow, I would attend my son's wedding reception. I would smile politely at Sarah's family, congratulate the happy couple, and behave with the dignity that no one could take away from me, regardless of how they chose to treat me. But I would also be taking the first steps toward a life that belonged entirely to me, a life built on Miguel's dreams and my own rediscovered strength, a life where my worth wasn't determined by my son's opinion of me or anyone else's judgment of my circumstances. The morning of Julian's wedding dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that used to make me melancholy but now seemed fitting. I woke early, not from anxiety but from anticipation. For the first time in months, I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. I spent the morning making final arrangements Julian would never know about until later. I signed the last papers for the Rosa Morrison Foundation, officially establishing it with an initial endowment of $100,000 from Miguel's investments. "The foundation is officially operational as of today," my lawyer told me. "The first grants can be distributed as early as next week." Next week. By then, everything would be different. I also called the Riverside Manor, where Julian's reception would be held. "This is Rosa Morrison," I said to the event coordinator. "I'm the groom's mother, and I wanted to discuss seating arrangements for this evening." "Oh yes, Mrs. Morrison. We have you at table 12 near the back." "Table 12, near the back. Of course. I'd like to make a change, if possible," I said calmly. "And I'd also like to inquire about making a donation to your children's charity program." The coordinator's tone changed immediately, becoming warm and attentive. "That's wonderfully generous. We'd be honored to discuss that with you. Perhaps we could arrange for you to be seated closer to the family table. I'm sure there's been some oversight." "An oversight? How diplomatic." "That would be lovely," I said. "I'll be happy to discuss the donation details when I arrive this evening." I spent the afternoon getting ready with care I hadn't taken in years. not to impress anyone, but because I was dressing for the woman I'd become. I had my hair professionally styled, where the stylist commented on how beautiful my silver highlights looked. "You have gorgeous bone structure," she said. "You should wear your hair away from your face more often. It's very elegant." Elegant. When was the last time anyone had called me elegant? I did my makeup carefully, put on the green dress that had cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 6 months, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was Rosa Morrison, but she was also someone new, someone who knew her worth, someone who would never again apologize for taking up space in the world. At 6:45, I drove to the Riverside Manor. Not at 7:30 as Julian had suggested, but early enough to make my presence known on my own terms. The valet who took my car keys treated me with the same deference he showed the other well-dressed guests, and for a moment, I almost laughed at how differently people responded when you carried yourself like someone who belonged. The event coordinator, a polished woman in her 40s, met me in the lobby with a warm smile and immediate recognition. "Mrs. Morrison, how wonderful to meet you in person. I've arranged for you to be seated at table 3, much closer to the family. And I have the information about our children's programs if you'd like to review it. Table 3. A significant upgrade from table 12 near the back." "Thank you so much," I said, accepting the glossy brochure about their charitable work. "This looks like exactly the kind of program I'd like to support. Shall we say a $10,000 donation to start?" Her eyes widened slightly. "That's incredibly generous, Mrs. Morrison. Thank you so much." $10,000. More money than Julian probably thought I'd ever seen at one time. Donated as casually as I might once have left a tip for a coffee. I entered the reception room and took in the scene Julian and Sarah had created. It was beautiful. Elegant floral arrangements, soft lighting, round tables draped in cream linens. The guests were exactly what I'd expected. Young professionals, older couples who were clearly Sarah's parents' friends, everyone dressed in understated luxury. I recognized Sarah immediately, radiant in her reception dress. Julian stood beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, accepting congratulations with practiced ease. And then Julian saw me. I watched his face change as he registered not just that I was there, but how I looked. The expensive dress, the professional styling, the way I carried myself. For just a moment, I saw confusion flicker across his features, as if he was trying to reconcile this version of his mother with the struggling woman he'd been dismissing. "Mom?" he said as I approached, his voice carefully neutral. "You look nice." Nice. Such a small word, but I heard the surprise buried underneath it. "Thank you, darling," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek in the way mothers do at formal events. "Congratulations. You both look absolutely beautiful." Sarah smiled at me with more warmth than she'd ever shown before, though I suspected it had more to do with my improved appearance than any genuine change of heart. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you so much for coming. That dress is stunning." "Thank you, dear. And please, call me Rosa." I spent the cocktail hour moving through the room with quiet confidence, making pleasant conversation with other guests, accepting compliments on my appearance, and watching Julian watch me from across the room. Every few minutes I'd catch him glancing in my direction, a small frown creasing his forehead as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed. During dinner, I was seated at a table with Sarah's aunt and uncle, a couple in their 60s who owned several successful restaurants. They were interested in my foundation work and impressed by my knowledge of charitable giving strategies that I'd been researching for weeks. "It's so refreshing to meet someone who's approaching philanthropy with such thoughtfulness," Sarah's aunt commented. "Too many people just write checks without really understanding the impact they're making." "Well," I said, cutting into my perfectly prepared salmon, "I believe that when you've been blessed with resources, you have a responsibility to use them wisely, especially for people who haven't had the same advantages. People who haven't had the same advantages. Like me, just a few months ago, when I thought I was poor and powerless and dependent on my son's scraps of affection." After dinner, as the evening wound toward its conclusion, Julian approached my table. His expression was carefully controlled, but I could see questions brewing behind his polite smile. "Mom, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course, sweetheart." We stepped onto a quiet terrace overlooking the manor's gardens, away from the music and laughter of the reception. Julian looked at me in the soft outdoor lighting, and I could see him struggling to understand something that didn't quite make sense to him. Mom, I have to ask, how did you afford that dress? And the hair, the makeup, everything looks so… He trailed off, unable to finish the thought politely. Expensive? I supplied helpfully. I thought you were struggling financially. You always seemed to be worried about money. I smiled at him, the kind of gentle smile a mother gives a child who's just realized something important, but hasn't quite figured out what it means yet. Oh, Julian, I said softly. There's so much about me that you never bothered to learn. That phrase hung in the air between us like a challenge Julian wasn't prepared to meet. I could see him processing my words, trying to understand what had shifted. What do you mean? He asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity mixed with concern. I smiled at him, the same gentle smile I'd given him when he was small and asking complex questions. Julian, do you remember your father's dream about investing? How you used to roll your eyes when he talked about his schemes. His face changed slightly. Mom, this isn't really the time. Those old ideas, I interrupted softly, have been quietly growing for 26 years. Your father was putting away small amounts every month, investing in companies he believed would change the world. Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, solar energy funds. Julian's expression shifted from impatience to confusion. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that while you've been embarrassed by your poor mother who works at a grocery store, that poor mother has been sitting on nearly $500,000 in investments she didn't even know existed until last month. The color drained from his face. $500,000. $437,000 to be precise. I've already used some of it to establish a foundation for elderly people whose families have abandoned them. The Rosa Morrison Foundation. We'll be helping women like me who've been discarded by ungrateful children. Julian's mouth opened and closed without sound. Behind us, I could hear the reception continuing. Laughter, music, celebration. You had money all this time? He asked finally. I had money I didn't know about while you were treating me like a charity case. I corrected gently. While you were excluding me from your life because I embarrassed you. While you were telling your girlfriend I just show up sometimes like a stray cat. He looked ashamed, but the shame was quickly replaced by a calculating look, the expression he wore when trying to turn a situation to his advantage. Mom, if you'd told me about the money, things would have been different. Would they? I asked. Would you have suddenly respected me because I had a bank account balance you approved of? Would you have been proud to introduce me to Sarah's family if you'd known I could afford a designer dress? That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Fair? I laughed, and there was no humor in it. Julian, you uninvited me from your wedding ceremony because your new wife's family might find me embarrassing. You've spent months treating me like a burden, like an obligation you couldn't wait to be rid of, and now you want to talk about what's fair? I was trying to protect you, he said desperately. Sarah's family can be judgmental. I thought you'd be more comfortable. You thought I'd be more comfortable being excluded from the most important day of my son's life? My voice remained calm, but I could feel 26 years of suppressed pain sharpening each word. You thought I'd be more comfortable sitting in the parking lot while my only child got married. Julian looked back toward the reception, where Sarah was probably wondering where her new husband had disappeared to. Mom, please, this is my wedding day. Can we talk about this later? Your wedding day, I repeated. Yes, it is. The day you chose to exclude your mother from the ceremony because she might embarrass you in front of the right kind of people. The day you decided that love wasn't as important as appearances. Fair? I laughed, and there was no humor in it. Julian, you uninvited me from your wedding ceremony because your new wife's family might find me embarrassing. You've spent months treating me like a burden, like an obligation you couldn't wait to be rid of. And now you want to talk about what's fair? I was trying to protect you, he said desperately. Sarah's family can be judgmental. I thought you'd be more comfortable. You thought I'd be more comfortable being excluded from the most important day of my son's life? My voice remained calm, but I could feel 26 years of suppressed pain sharpening each word. You thought I'd be more comfortable sitting in the parking lot while my only child got married. Julian looked back toward the reception, where Sarah was probably wondering where her new husband had disappeared to, where her family was enjoying the celebration they'd paid for and controlled completely. Mom, please, this is my wedding day. Can we talk about this later? Your wedding day, I repeated. Yes, it is. The day you chose to exclude your mother from the ceremony because she might embarrass you in front of the right kind of people. The day you decided that love wasn't as important as appearances. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope with Julian's name written across it. I brought you something, I said. A wedding gift. He took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check for $25,000 and a note he read aloud. For my son Julian, on his wedding day. This represents every dollar I would have spent on a wedding celebration for a son who was proud to call me his mother. Since that celebration will never happen, perhaps you can use it for your honeymoon. With love, from the mother you were ashamed to seat at the family table. Julian stared at the check, and I watched as the full weight of what he'd lost began to hit him. Not just the money, but the realization of what he'd thrown away. Mom, he started, but I held up my hand. That check represents just one gift I would have given you if you'd allowed me to be part of your life as your mother, instead of treating me like an embarrassment. The foundation I've established will help women whose children have abandoned them, but it will also serve as a reminder of what real family should look like. I stepped closer to him. I raised you to be better than this, Julian. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I sold my grandmother's jewelry for your textbooks. I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities I never had. And the moment you achieved success, you decided I was no longer good enough to share it with you. I never said you weren't good enough, he protested weakly. You didn't have to say it. You showed it every time you excluded me from your life, every time you treated my love like a burden. From inside, I could hear the last dance starting. Soon guests would leave, and this conversation would become part of Julian's wedding memories forever. The money changes things, doesn't it? I asked quietly. Knowing that your poor, embarrassing mother is actually financially independent. Knowing that while you were treating her like a charity case, she was building a foundation to help other abandoned women. Julian's face crumpled. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I touched his cheek gently. The foundation officially opens next week. I'll be hosting a gala at the downtown Marriott Friday at 7 p.m. Black tie. All the people you think are so important will be there. City council members, business leaders. Hope flickered in his eyes. You'll both be welcome to attend, I continued. If you'd like to see what your mother has built while you were deciding she wasn't worth your time. But Julian, I won't be the same woman who begged for your attention. If you want to be part of my life going forward, it will be because you've decided I'm worth knowing, not because you've suddenly discovered I'm worth something. I left Julian standing on that terrace holding the check, his face pale with understanding what he'd lost. I didn't look back as I walked through the reception hall, nodding politely to guests who smiled at me with newfound respect. Sarah approached me near the exit, her expression carefully neutral but curious. Mrs. Morrison, thank you so much for coming tonight, she said with genuine warmth for the first time. That was incredibly generous of you to donate to the Manor's children's program. It was my pleasure, dear, I replied. I believe in supporting causes that help people who need advocates. I hope we'll see more of you now that Julian and I are married. I smiled at her. That will depend entirely on Julian, but I suspect you'll both learn quite a bit about me in the coming weeks. The drive home was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since Julian had started pushing me away, I felt complete. The following week passed in a blur of activity. The Rosa Morrison Foundation officially opened, and the response was overwhelming. Local news stations wanted interviews. The mayor's office called about partnerships. Other philanthropists reached out to collaborate. Mrs. Morrison, said Dr. Patricia Hayes, the director of City Senior Services, during our Wednesday lunch, your foundation is addressing a crisis too many people ignore. Adult children abandoning aging parents create a silent epidemic of isolation. I have personal experience with that crisis, I said. It's remarkable how invisible you can become to your own family when you're no longer considered useful. By Thursday, I still hadn't heard from Julian. Part of me had expected him to call immediately, but this silence was probably for the best. If he was going to rebuild our relationship, it needed to be genuine. Friday evening arrived with crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. The downtown Marriott ballroom had been transformed for the Foundation's launch gala. Local businesses had donated flowers, catering, and entertainment. The guest list included city council members, business leaders, and exactly the kind of society figures that Sarah would find impressive. I wore a midnight blue gown I'd purchased specifically for this evening, elegant and appropriate for a woman hosting her own charitable event. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged in this world, not because she'd been invited, but because she'd created her own place in it. The ballroom filled steadily as 7 o'clock approached. I moved through the crowd with easy confidence, greeting guests, discussing the Foundation's mission, accepting congratulations and donations with the grace of someone who'd finally learned her own worth. "Rosa!" called Margaret Williams, a woman I'd known from church for years, but who'd never paid attention to me when I was just the grocery store cashier. "This is absolutely wonderful. I had no idea you were involved in philanthropy." "It's a recent development," I said with a smile. "Sometimes life gives you opportunities you never expected." At 7:30, as I was speaking with the mayor about housing initiatives, I saw them enter the ballroom. Julian wore the same tuxedo from his wedding reception, looking handsome but uncertain as he scanned the room. Sarah was beside him in a stunning cocktail dress, her expression curious and awed as she took in the elegant event and distinguished guest list. They stood near the entrance for several minutes, clearly uncertain how to navigate this version of me, the version that commanded respect from important people, that hosted events in ballrooms, that moved through high society with natural ease. I continued my conversation with the mayor, but watched as Julian and Sarah gradually made their way through the crowd toward me. Other guests stopped them along the way, introducing themselves, asking how they knew me. I saw Julian's face change as he realized these people already knew me, already respected me, already considered me someone worth knowing. "Mom," Julian said when he reached me, his voice carefully respectful, "this is incredible. I had no idea you knew so many people." "There's quite a lot you don't know about me," I replied gently, "but I'm glad you came tonight." When I addressed the crowd of 200 guests, I felt calm confidence that would have seemed impossible months earlier. "Good evening, and thank you all for being here," I began, looking out at the faces gathered to support the foundation. The Rosa Morrison Foundation was born from a simple recognition that a person's worth isn't determined by how others choose to value them. That dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by family members who decide you're no longer convenient to love. I paused, letting my eyes find Julian in the crowd. He was listening intently, his face serious and focused. Too many women my age have been discarded by children who see them as burdens rather than blessings, who've forgotten that love isn't conditional on convenience, and that family obligations don't disappear when they become inconvenient. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. This foundation exists to remind these women, and their families, that worth isn't measured by bank account balances or social status. It's measured by the love we've given, the sacrifices we've made, and the strength we've shown in raising the children who sometimes forget to value us. When I finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. People stood, approached me with donations and offers of volunteer time, shared their own stories of family abandonment and reconciliation. Julian and Sarah stayed until the end, watching as I accepted congratulations from community leaders. "Mom," Julian said finally, his voice softer, more genuine, "I owe you an apology that's much bigger than anything I can say tonight." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You do. I don't know how to earn back the right to call you my mother after the way I've treated you. Julian, I will always be your mother. But whether you get to have a mother who trusts you, who includes you in her life, that's something you'll have to earn back." Sarah stepped forward. "Rosa, I had no idea how Julian had been treating you. If I'd known, I would have insisted you be part of our wedding ceremony. I hope as you build your marriage, you'll remember that family relationships require tending, especially when they're difficult. I'd like to be involved with the foundation, Julian said quietly, if you'll have me. Not to make up for what I've done, but because I want to learn how to be the son of a woman I'm finally starting to understand. I smiled at him, the first genuinely warm smile I'd given him in months. The foundation always needs volunteers, especially ones who understand what it's like to take the people who love you for granted. 3 months later, Julian hosted a dinner party to introduce his friends to his mother, the philanthropist who ran the foundation changing lives throughout the city. "This is my mother, Rosa Morrison," he said with pride I hadn't heard since he was a child. "She's doing incredible work helping families rebuild relationships damaged by neglect." That evening, driving home to my beautiful new condominium, I thought about Miguel's letter and his faith that I was stronger than I knew, worth more than I believed. He'd been right, but it had taken losing everything I thought mattered to discover everything that actually did. I learned that sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is to stop accepting less than you deserve. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let others treat your love like it's worthless. In the end, I didn't get revenge on my son. I got something much better. I got myself back.